I'm continuing my discussion of the U.S. Constitution and the Republican versus the Democratic understanding of the Constitution. I want to highlight some ways in which our Constitution has moved away from its original Republican understanding to now a kind of more progressive, a more left-wing view of the Constitution. How did that happen? How did we get from here to there? It certainly didn't happen overnight, and yet it happened, I would argue, in a relatively concentrated space of time. So I'm going to give a mini constitutional history, but what I really want to show, the bottom line of it all, is that from the founding all the way, even past the Civil War, to the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th century, right up to the New Deal, we had an American system that, although not the same all the way through, was nevertheless recognizably had the ingredients that the founders had put together. And it's not till the 20th century with the progressive movement, a movement that began with Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was a kind of apostle of progressivism, but that progressivism didn't come to fruition until the New Deal with Franklin Roosevelt. We now begin to see a perversion of the understanding of government. And you could almost say that America at this point becomes a different country because the limitations that were put on the government by the founders begin to be ignored, begin to be set aside, and begin to be set aside by a kind of new Supreme Court, an FDR majority that now goes along with all the provisions of the New Deal, even though many of them are a flagrant violation of economic rights. Now, to tell the story, we need to realize that our rights are political rights, which are the rights of voting, our rights of participation in the government. There are civil rights and civil liberties, and these are the rights, a lot of them specified in the Bill of Rights, free speech, freedom of assembly, and so on. And then there are also economic rights, which are the rights, by and large, to earn money and to keep the fruits of your own labor. And if you think about it, these rights are all equally important. It's not as if some are more important than the other. Hey, I want to have my free speech, but guess what? I don't mind being a slave in the sense that every time I work, you're allowed to take everything I have. No, to take everything that I have that I've worked for is just as much an injury to me. It's a violation of my personality. Why? Because my work and the fruits of my labor represent my planning. They represent my priorities. I've decided to do this. I've decided to engage in these sorts of exchanges. And why? Because I've ultimately, my hopes, my dreams, my aspirations for myself and my family are all wrapped up into this. So to take that away is ultimately a fundamental deprivation. In fact, to tax it away is also a deprivation, and you can think of a tax rate of 100% as being, in a sense, an economic definition of slavery. So economic rights, political rights, civil rights, these rights all kind of go together. And it's the job of the court to protect these rights. Now, this goes all the way back to the earliest decisions of the court, notably a decision in the early 19th century called Marbury versus Madison. And this was the decision that signals the ability of the court to decide whether laws are constitutional or unconstitutional. Interestingly, if you look at the Constitution, it talks about the fact that laws can be unconstitutional. They can go against the Constitution. But who gets the final say over whether a law is constitutional or not? It turns out this was an undecided question in the very early years of the Republic, and it wasn't until Marbury versus Madison that there was a kind of widespread acceptance, and I think a correct one, that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of whether or not a law is constitutional. By the way, the issue wasn't fully decided, and even in the Civil War, Lincoln kind of questioned whether or not the Supreme Court decides, not just for that particular case, Lincoln agreed, but for all subsequent or similar cases, whether the Supreme Court was the final word on the Constitution. In the Civil War, there was a battle over what the Constitution meant in terms of secession. Does it allow states a right to secede? And quite frankly, the Constitution is a little ambiguous ambiguous on this score. The Constitution never foresaw and specified, hey, listen, these are the terms on which we're asking the states to come on board. And by the way, if any of them ever want to leave, here are the 5 steps that they need to take. Or alternatively, they can't leave. This is a permanent pact. Recognize that when you join this club, you're not going to be able to leave ever. The Constitution didn't say any of this, and therefore there was a reasonable debate. But interestingly, both sides of the debate accepted the words and the terms of the Constitution. In fact, both sides were equally insistent that they were being truly faithful to the Constitution. And as I say, it's difficult to proclaim one or the other side absolutely right for the simple reason that the Constitution itself is a little unclear on when you can leave. But what I want us to suggest here, and I'll pick it up in the next segment, is simply the idea that starting with the New Deal, we begin to see a massive government assault on the idea of individual economic rights. And you have courts allowing the state to grow bigger and bigger and bigger and allow the state to invade economic rights that were previously protected by previous courts. And now the court basically stepped aside and said, if the legislature wants it, we're going to allow it. We are living in economically rocky times. The debt ceiling crisis has come to a head. The Biden administration is doing its best to force more government spending. They've reached a settlement to get the deal done. But for now, the national debt continues to skyrocket. That is not good. But how are you protecting your savings? Times like these are when concerned savers like me turn to gold. And I, like thousands of similar-minded people, buy my gold from Birch Gold. Here's the easiest way to do it. Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. You don't pay a penny out of pocket. As the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, band together against the dollar, more and more central banks are diversifying. You know what they're buying? Gold. Follow their lead. Text Dinesh to 989898 for your free information kit on gold. There's no obligation, just information. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Thousands of happy customers. Birch Gold can help protect your savings too. So talk to those guys. Text Dinesh to 989898 today.